all I can do is let my actions do the talking.
Hey everyone, thank you for watching. Ivan Blaska is here. I'm going to try and keep this short and sweet. So we're looking at carbs and proteins. Carbs are going to build more muscle than protein, and let me explain to you why. First off, we need protein. Protein is important. In fact, that's what builds muscle, is protein. But my main issue is how much protein we need. And I believe that it's anywhere from 0.8 to 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. Now, if you're a serious strength athlete, again, I still think 1.2 grams per kilogram is plenty enough. But you see, I'm biased by health, so I'm not looking to get huge or maximize muscle growth. And I question whether that's really healthy, quite honestly. So I believe that having above average muscle for your frame, again, my population is the general population, okay? And even strength athletes, but I'm not looking at extreme powerlifting or extreme bodybuilding that can include the use of anabolic steroids and other pharmaceuticals. So those protein requirements may be different, and even still, it's going to kind of exacerbate the generally unhealthy practice of, obviously, using drugs and so forth. But that's a whole nother issue in itself, and that's not what this video is about. What this video about is what's more important for building muscle, protein or carbs, and I believe it's carbs, and let me explain why. What builds muscle is exercise, okay? If you don't exercise and you eat a lot of protein, it's not really going to do any good. Your body's not going to build a lot of muscle. You have to put stress on your muscles. Protein doesn't stress your muscles. Protein it's needed to build muscles. It's the building blocks of muscles, but we have to exercise to build muscle. And so what determines effectiveness of exercise is a fuel, not a building block, and that fuel is carbohydrates. Now, this is based on the fact of the intensity, the substrate intensity relationship. So the greater the exercise intensity, the greater the carbohydrate usage. So that right there ought to tell you that if you want to build muscle, you want to be properly fueled and have adequate carbohydrates on board so you can train at a high intensity. And thus, the high intensity training is going to build muscle. And the protein we need, and another thing is how much protein we eat. I think what's more important is how well we can absorb the protein and how well our body handles it. I believe that when we train, your muscles become more sensitive to insulin, and I also believe you become more efficient at utilizing protein, right? So not so sure about studies out there on that, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are some out there that pretty much confirm what I just said. By the way, I will list studies at the bottom of the video like I do for most of my videos, and particularly this video because this is an important topic. And I want to make sure I support what I say with evidence. So carbohydrates are going to build more muscle based on the idea and the fact that they are key at regulating intensity of exercise. So, and for people who believe that they need to go higher protein when they want to cut or lose fat and keep muscle, again, protein is not meant to be used as an energy substrate. And so what you do is you take away its ability to rebuild by using it as an energy substrate. When we have carbohydrates are sparing of protein. So when you have ample carbohydrates on board, you're allowing protein to do its first job, which is rebuild and repair, not to be used as a secondary job, which is a source. So if you want to go on a cut, you don't have to raise protein. What I would say is you would replace some of your denser carbohydrate sources with more high fiber carbohydrates like squash and beans and those kinds of things, okay? That would be a way you would also reduce your grains as well. So that would be a way to go on a cut without having to increase protein. You go high fiber rather than high protein, okay? Now, when it comes to building muscle, they've looked at studies that have actually been carbohydrate only group for post-workout, right? Carbohydrate only group, protein only group, and then carbohydrate plus protein. Most studies across the board show that the combination or the mixture of carbohydrates plus proteins builds muscle, and it improves glycogen resynthesis a lot better. So that right there ought to tell you that carbohydrates are important. Why? Well, carbohydrates are a prime stimulus of insulin release. Now, so are some proteins, okay? There's no question that some proteins are insulinogenic, particularly dairy proteins, which is why I believe that plant proteins, and later in this presentation I'll discuss why plant proteins are better for building muscle and for fat loss. I believe that animal proteins are mainly for building muscle and maybe in an unhealthy over-anabolic expression way, and it impedes fat loss. And there's a whole other host of issues involved. But the thing about it is, I'm saying it's more about a balanced diet. It doesn't have to be high protein to build muscle. Let's also remember that for every gram of carbohydrates follows 3 grams of water. Well, muscle is mainly water. It's a high amount of water. So when you have adequate carbohydrates, your muscles are going to be adequately hydrated, and you're going to have plenty. That's why in bodybuilding, whenever you bring carbohydrates on board, you're a lot fuller, you're a lot more anabolic. There you go, carbohydrates. They stimulate the most anabolic hormone in our body, which is insulin. And if you eat the right carbs, you stimulate insulin in a healthy way, where it's not a high spike of insulin. And I totally disagree with that. The high spike after workout, I just think that's not looking at the long term, not looking in our best interest in terms of long-term health. Now, this is anecdotal, but at the same time, if we hit on a side of caution, don't we want to be on the safer side, right? And so that's the way I look at it. Another thing about building muscle is the recovery angle. So when do we build muscle? A lot of people, it's been said that we don't build muscle when we train, we build muscle when we recover. And so if we optimize the immune system by eating antioxidant-rich carbohydrates, you're not going to find antioxidant-rich proteins, okay, unless it's plant-based like beans and those kinds of things. But there's not many antioxidants in like steak or chicken or eggs or dairy. They're relatively low in antioxidants. So carbohydrates are going to expedite recovery, and so it's going to allow the muscle building process to work a lot better. Another thing is alkaline diets, alkalizing diets that are plant-based tend to favor lean muscle mass. If you look at the bottom of this video, there's a study about that. So animal proteins tend to be acidic, and this can impede an anabolic and muscle building environment. Plant proteins encourage a muscle building environment because they're alkalizing. And that's also good for our bones too. It prevents the leaching of calcium from bones, which can sometimes occur in an acidic internal environment or a diet that's overly acidic. Now, a lot of people argue, well, plant proteins are incomplete and they're not as anabolic, their amino acid scores are not as high. I actually think that's a good thing. Let me explain why. I believe in the systemic effect of anabolic versus catabolic. I believe that's why I believe that there's like a combination of things that interact with each other, and it tends to shift the balance one way or the other, like a little bit this way, a little bit that way, but to certain degrees. So you can go, it's not all or nothing. It's kind of like a spectrum, right? So if you're eating animal proteins, high in animal proteins, yeah, you're anabolic, but you're not going to be body fat catabolic. When you eat, because dairy proteins are insulinogenic, right? And I've worked with a lot of clients, people who eat a lot of animal foods, they just tend to not lose weight. It's that simple. Yes, there are exceptions to the rule, but those exceptions to the rule don't make the rules. And I see them, and it's just a disservice to higher education and knowledge, quite frankly, because it just shows that you can do things the wrong way, and your genetics are so strong that it's going to override it. Now, plant proteins have a low insulin index, so they're anabolic, but they don't impede fat loss. And that's why I like plant proteins better than animal proteins. As far as plant proteins not being complete proteins, I think this is actually good because they're dilute proteins. They're dilute. That encourages variety. So you don't have to just eat a steak or egg and say, oh, I got all my aminos. On a plant-based diet, you have to eat a variety of foods. And when you have a diet that's balanced in variety, you're going to be better health. You're going to have a better health overall. I think that's key. Now, as far as amino acids and the high amino, I'm going to play devil's advocate. Look at the bottom of this video. There's a study. I'm actually going to open it up right here. It's called the metabolic signature associated with the Western dietary pattern. What they find is, in this study, they concluded that the Western dietary pattern is associated with a metabolic signature characterized by increased levels of amino acids, including branched chain amino acids. I thought that's fascinating. So they're actually finding that having elevated levels of branched chain amino acids can be associated with insulin resistance, increased risk of diabetes and obesity and metabolic syndrome in general. Now again, we can associate this, okay? A lot of people who maybe are higher protein have healthier habits, lifestyle habits. So maybe that's not. But again, I'm playing devil's advocate here. I'm not saying this is the cause or the culprit, but certainly it drew my attention, and it should draw yours too, because I believe that sometimes having a complete protein may not be the best thing. Quite honestly, we actually might want to dilute a protein. Because, and it's the same thing with heme iron versus non-heme iron. People talk about heme iron, which is mainly only found in animal protein or red meat for that matter, is a lot more bioavailable than non-heme iron, which is in plant protein. Well, here's the issue. There are actually studies showing that heme protein, while it's more bioavailable, can also potentially be hazardous on our health. Look at the studies at the bottom of this video so you can see what I'm talking about. And this is the same thing I'm talking about with dilute plant proteins. I think the fact that they're dilute is actually better for our health. Okay? So I'm questioning the idea of actually having a complete amino acid profile in one sitting, like a steak or eggs and those kinds of things. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's why the negative health effects of those foods in excess and in some populations are being found, because part of it could be this amino acid factor. So anyway. The key is a balanced diet, getting an adequate amount of protein, and carbohydrates are very protein sparing, and they're very anabolic to the fact that they stimulate the most anabolic hormone in the body, insulin, and they also fuel intense workouts, which is what's needed to build muscle. Okay, and unprocessed plant-rich, nutrient-dense carbohydrate sources are also going to be full of fiber, so that'll help you with fat loss. The plant proteins have a low insulin index, like beans and whatnot. They're rich in antioxidants, which fuels recovery, which is when we build muscle. So I went ahead and just made my case on why carbohydrates are very important. Proteins are essential, but again, I believe it's 0.8 to 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. And what the research shows is maybe 1.5 to 1.7 grams per kilogram body weight, which is on the higher end, but it's, just in case. But higher than 1.7 grams per kilogram of body weight is unnecessary. And I wrote an article on this, an extensive article on bodybuilding.com. And so you can check that out at the bottom of this video to get more information. So feel free to leave comments and questions, and thank you for watching.